good to have you back on.
Thank
Talk
you.
about
Great to be here.
fasting and things. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
just I've been interspersed with other things I'm learning about fasting more, and so I had more questions. It's just kind of I guess
great.
how it goes when you have more information. Really, it just leads to more questions.
Yeah, I mean, our small group of fasters, about 50 of us in our group, completed a 3-day fast last night. So the team is feeling quite energized, and somebody that's pushing on for 7 days. She started a little earlier than everybody else, and she's completing her first 7-day fast this evening, South African time, 7 o'clock, which is great. She's managed to drop about what is it in pounds? About 10 pounds over the 7-day period. And for a lady that is in her mid 50s, weight loss is something that doesn't come easy to the mature market. And so we're ecstatic with her performance. But most of all, she cleared a fatty liver. So she had liver debris inside her liver, and she's managed to totally clear her liver within 7 days, which is just fantastic. I mean, now the outlook for her health journey is just so much brighter than a week ago. She's been battling type 2 diabetes. We've managed to remove her medication from her regime, which is really good. She is using a bit of moringa, which is a herb, quite popular when managing blood sugar. Yeah, but she's off her chemical medication, so she's off all of her insulin, which is a real win for her. So we're really heartened by this week's performance.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. To a lot of people out there, that sounds like just such a crazy kind of thing to do. 7 days of fasting, and 3 days is enough for kind of most people to
Yeah,
really hit their limit. But to do seven, that would be
yeah,
such a mental place to be at. Really, a strong mental
yeah.
place you have to be at sometimes.
Yeah, and I've been speaking to her obviously on a daily basis, and she's telling me more around her emotional well-being is starting to pay dividends for her during her fast. She said she had quite a shaky day 3, and emotionally she's feeling so strong now. And I guess that's the work that you get from post 3 days, or should we say longer than 3 days fasting. The other benefits are intestinal improvements. So the intestinal lining keeps building, so the cells in the intestine repair themselves continuously over time. She's stopped on autophagy, as we'd like to call it, so that dissipates by day 5. I guess each person's different. I'm quoting Dr. Mindy Perez around the autophagy peaking at 3 days and dissipating by day 5. Some people, for instance, this lady, in her case, her fatty liver kind of reduced her autophagy start kind of hour from what one expected at 24 hours to more like 36, maybe even 38 hours, and then her autophagy started to ramp up, and so she's really got the repair benefits only deeper into her fast, but that's based on a liver that's fairly damaged and fairly blocked up.
Yeah, I think there's just so many different scenarios when it comes to people's bodies on how fasting, intermittent fasting, all these things are going to work for different people. The length of time, just all the factors. Really, it's crazy to think about all you have to know when it comes to even just knowing your own body, whether that be, like I said, yourself or another person that's helping you along the way. Just the infinite number of factors that even if everything's the exact same except one thing with somebody else, that could be the world difference in results.
Yeah, I mean, from a kind of coaching perspective, I use the glucose keto ratio just to guide me to understand when somebody is starting in their autophagy phase, where we really see an increase in ketones in the body and a decrease in blood sugar. And we use a ratio. We divide glucose by keto reading and derive a ratio. And that ratio helps us understand what phase somebody is in. So while you're correct in saying, and 100% correct in saying that each person is different, there's so many factors. There is a little bit of kind of science we put behind that by using those two markers to ascertain when somebody starts their autophagy journey, or should we say that when their keto glucose ratio drops below 100, then we start to see autophagy kicking in. So we try to use a little bit of science at the same time, and that helps my clients understand how many days they've actually got to fast, because some would say a 3-day fast is good for everyone. And then those with liver issues and those with pancreatic issues, and those with lipid issues in terms of lipid burning, so obesity markers that are fairly high, that glucose-keto ratio will only start really reflecting around about, as I mentioned, 38 hours, maybe even 48 hours.
Yeah, and that's such a kind of a struggle, I think, to think about that aspect, because it's like those are potentially the people who want to do it for the weight loss, and they have to kind of push a little bit harder than maybe, the other person. So it's kind of, a struggle in that sense. But before we dive too deep into things, let's
Yes.
I appreciate you coming back on the podcast. It's cool
Sure.
to get to have you back on. And if you didn't get to see the first podcast, go check that out. It's a really good episode on fasting and on a little bit on autophagy and things. And it's just kind of a I guess more of like a base introduction compared to this one. This is meant to be more as a kind of a follow up, I guess. Additional topics added on. So to really get into things, I guess just my first question when it comes to intermittent fasting. I've been doing a little bit, not too much of the fasting so far, but just kind of getting my body used to, because I'm that kind of person that used to eat 4 to 6 times a day, interspersed throughout the day. So just dipping my toe in, and really my fasting is about 12 hours right now, which is pretty much nothing. It's sleeping plus a few more hours. But my first question, based on really my own experience, is past that fasting time frame in your feeding window, is there any specific foods to really kind of target when it comes to that eating window? I mean, I know it's probably a little bit different per person, but just in a general sense, is there any foods that would be better to go after?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand what it is that you want to achieve. The combination between fasting and nutrition, are the remit is so wide, or the answer I'm going to give you is so broad. So as an example, if I'm planning to lose weight with intermittent fasting, it's vital that I remove all carbohydrates and sugars from my diet, and particularly when I break fast, because what has happened is your cell is opened up to its maximum after about 12 and a half hours. It starts, because your blood sugar normalizes after 12 hours. And so your body is really seeking kind of nutrition and hunting it out. And whatever you put into your body at break of fast is going to really determine what it is that you're going to achieve through intermittent fasting. And as an example, intermittent fasting and, say, for instance, bodybuilding, I would be looking to fast nothing below 16 hours. And I would then aim for a training session at 16 hours. Now, a lot of people would say that's counterintuitive. I've got no fuel in my system, or certainly I've got no glucose in my system. And surely my training session is going to be largely affected. And yes, you might not be able to push the numbers that you normally push when you've had protein or some sort of intake hours before. But I warrant that your growth hormone is peaking at just after 16 hours. And so if we then take on food in a bodybuilding phase, and we remain in a protein state, so we really drive proteins and fats, those two combinations, and more protein and fat, and that being the difference, that somebody losing weight wants to have more fat and less protein. And I guess that maybe that answers your question in terms of what foods to target. So if I was in weight loss, I would look to break with a good healthy fat like an avocado. I would look to maybe even a bulletproof coffee. And if your followers just want to search bulletproof coffee, there are a number of bulletproof coffee recipes. And just in summary, it's normal filter coffee with either coconut cream, coconut fat, butter, and or cream, so a splash of cream, and that drives then the fat content in your nutrition as you break fast, and that would be really beneficial to somebody losing weight. And the reason for that is we want to keep insulin levels as low as possible. Insulin is the thing that we are trying to manage when we're losing weight. And in a fasted state of more than 12 hours, where blood sugar normalizes, your insulin sensitivity is incredible. And so very critical if you're losing weight to make sure that you break your fast with a good fat. If you're a bodybuilder and you're seeking to put on muscle, good to break your fast, in my opinion, with more protein than fat, but the combination of those two would be ideal.
Gotcha. And it makes sense too. So you mentioned like the bodybuilding thing is, I think it's counterintuitive in a way to think like, oh, bodybuilding, I want to build muscle. I want to be, constantly eating, even, hopefully eating good things. But when it comes to intermittent fasting, is gaining lean muscle a realistic goal?
I think it is. I think one needs to understand that you need to be planning your training schedule very carefully. And I wouldn't train more than 3 of 6 days in a fasted state. And I wouldn't train anything, if I was in that fasted state, I wouldn't train before I'd hit 16 hours. And I would load myself with protein post that training session. But building lean muscle and fasting is absolutely possible. And I think that's possibly an area that people don't necessarily understand, is that when human growth hormone starts to get released inside the body, the immediate gains that you're going to be achieving, those are going to be lean muscle gains.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's just such an interesting, and like I said, kind of counterintuitive idea to the whole, what you typically see from a bodybuilder, hear about from bodybuilders is like, wake up during the night and even eat a meal. It's kind of,
Sure.
it's interesting to go at it from an intermittent fasting perspective. You mentioned having like a coffee and thing after your fast, and like, maybe putting some fats in there, but does coffee or tea in the morning, so let's say you're gonna intermittent fast through the morning, but does it, having a coffee or a tea in the morning, does it impact your fast in any way?
So a black coffee, black tea, no milk, no cream, no sugar, doesn't typically break the fasted state. In other words, the effect that it has on the insulin levels in the system is negligible. And so what I call that is dirty fasting. And so you can have that black cup of coffee in the morning, or a black cup of herbal tea, or it doesn't have to be black tea either, just a herbal tea, obviously without any sugars, because the sugars would then obviously break the fast. But those are quite regularly consumed in intermittent fasting. If you were, however, looking for autophagy, and let's try and distinguish the difference between the two. So autophagy being the natural degradation of cells in your system. So we call it the cleanup of of fasting, versus intermittent fasting, where I'm just managing my insulin levels, i.e., I'd like to lose some weight. I would go pure water in my intermittent fast, because then you will achieve autophagy as well as achieve your weight loss goals. So to answer your question, black coffee, black tea doesn't technically break fast. I just don't think that. Well, I know there's not any autophagy benefits from black coffee or tea in the mornings.
Gotcha. Um, I think we talked about it last time a little bit about kind of having some kind of environment to where, if it's possible, you can kind of grow your own food and stuff.
Yes.
And we mentioned kind of like the pollution of the water source and everything. But when it comes to, and I don't know if there's any even research done on this or thought done on this yet, but when it comes to like modern day, because we do have kind of polluted water sources, would there be any, or has there been any thought done on how that would affect our body in a fasted state? Because we don't have anything else in our body, so would the pollutants maybe in the water affect our body to a greater degree?
Unfortunately, Daniel, yeah, the answer is yes. Deuterium is a molecule that comes from hydrogen, but it's a polluted hydrogen, if that makes sense. So it's slightly changed the hydrogen molecule into deuterium. Our bodies produce deuterium naturally. It's just that now that we're taking it in a polluted water source, the deuterium levels in our bodies are at a much higher level than they've ever been. And so water intake, unless you're getting it from a unpolluted source, and they're not many, and kind of glacier sources and frozen water where we haven't had that water cycle affected by pollution, that's the kind of cleanest water you can consume. Having said that, I mean, I'm on a water journey, as I might have mentioned to you in the last session, and I've developed some water that really does assist during your fasting. And I always say this to people, that if you were to understand that the water is a vehicle transporting energy through your system, the electrolytes in your body are kind of the vessel that hold the ability to transport that energy. Making sure that you've got the right electrolyte mix inside your water, and making sure your water has a good source of nutrients, is vital to improve your results from fasting. Will it diminish and totally just ground zero your fasting efforts? Absolutely not. Would it improve them? Would I get better results out of a 16-hour fast if I was drinking water that was well mineralized and rich with electrolytes? Absolutely, you would. More important for those going into prolonged and extended fasting, where those minerals are obviously depleted over a 24-hour period, then it becomes critical.
Our last conversation, where we were talking about the water sources, and I think we don't take so many factors into consideration, and a lot of times that's just the fact that we're not educated, as in general, on how all these things can affect our bodies. A lot of people, not even to the point of how the food we put into our body goes, works within our body. So just the tons of other factors that do affect our health, which is the big point of the weight room. While we're talking about fasting, while we're talking about, want to do some episodes later on sleep, and on, the ones we've done on recently on like microdosing and things like that, to where things we just don't typically get exposed to, these ideas and these things. When it comes to, like, if you're about to do a fast, so you're preparing for a fast, or if you're getting done with a fast, we talked a little bit about this on the last podcast, but just to retouch on it, what are some good foods and maybe good supplements you would recommend for the pre or post stages of a fast?
Yeah, I mean, Daniel, obviously, I run a commercial business where I've created products to support fasting. We have an ultimate support fasting support cap, and really the underlying ingredients in that ultimate fasting cap is moringa, because moringa has an amazing detoxification function in the body. And the other one is kale. So kale, that we know as the vegetable that grows in the garden. It's a super nutrient, better than spinach, because spinach does have a negative. If you overexpose yourself to spinach, it can lead to kidney stones. So the kidneys come under a lot of pressure if you have too much spinach. And its cousin, call it its cousin, is kale. And loading up on kale and loading up on moringa and loading up on kelp, so sea kelp, very rich in nutrients. And those three are really the basis of my, what I call my pre-fast loading cap. And we tend to do that on a prolonged fast for anything over 48 hours. We tend to load that up 2 days before we go into fast. Then there are other protocols that we observe as we start a prolonged fast. And some of those are to decrease the amount of protein in your system as you start approaching a fast, and really look towards vegetables as your source of nutrients. That's always our guidance. And as we approach probably about 12 hours before we start our fast, is then to exit all the fats out of your system as well, so that your last meal is literally a vegetarian meal of sorts. And that's really the kind of preparation that we put our bodies into when we go into a prolonged fast.
Someone doesn't know that, they kind of just may go into a fast. It's like, oh, I'm deciding to fast today. And what could one expect to see when they don't prepare properly for a fast?
So, Daniel, I think the jury's out on the marked difference between correct loading and incorrect loading. I think that when we look at the word autophagy and we look at what the autophagy process is in the body from a fasting perspective, and that's really what we're trying to achieve in those prolonged fasts, is autophagy, is that autophagy is about shocking your body. So autophagy can be created out of zeroing the calorie intake and putting your body into a state of emergency. It could be an aggressive exercise program or a cold swim. So in sub 10 degree water, and I'm sorry, that's 10 degrees South Africa, so I'm not really sure what it is Fahrenheit, but 10 degree water would certainly give your body and put your body into a state of shock. And that even ignites autophagy in the smallest of ways. And really, the reason I'm mentioning this is when somebody goes into their first extended fast, so their first 3-day fast, they won't feel any difference whether they're prepared or unprepared, because the body is really reacting at that point to a state of emergency. As you get deeper and more versed in the fasting environment, you will notice that if you don't prepare properly, things like constant headaches through your fast, your energy level, so having depleted energy to the point where you've actually got to go and take a nap and or lie down, and it affects your everyday operation. Those are the kind of things that you will find being affected should you not do preparation, I would say, in your second or even third 3-day fast, or extended fast, if you like to call it that. And having said that, I also would warrant that in an intermittent fasting program. Week 1 would be fine. In fact, in week 1, you might start with that sugar headache, which really is the sugar leaving your liver and your system finally. That can bring on a headache. But even for those that are intermittent fasting, say beyond week 2 and week 3 and week 4, I really would recommend that they focus on making sure that the electrolytes are well looked after in their system. And those electrolytes must include things like potassium, magnesium, and some sodium, but very limited in terms of what sodium one's using, because you don't want to dehydrate your system and put strain on your kidneys. But some salts are obviously permitted. But those are the 3 main ingredients that I would focus on. So magnesium from a cramps perspective, so reducing cramping. Potassium helps you with your blood sugar. So when we take sugar out of our systems in an intermittent fasting program, we eventually start seeing the body swing. And what I mean by swinging is it can have a sugar low and not a sugar high. And when one has a sugar low, you can feel lightheaded, nauseous, dizzy, and not really good for you. So potassium chloride in particular, and please, your followers need to understand, do not try this without consulting with somebody who's in the fasting space that creates these products, because you don't want to get potassium chloride incorrect. It has massive impacts on your heart as well as your blood sugar levels. But these are the things one needs to watch when even intermittent fasting, is to make sure that you do replenish the electrolytes that your body loses from hours 12 onwards. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And you mentioned kind of that first 3 day fast, extended fast for someone, and how it really may not be too much different, just the feeling in your body. What should somebody expect? I think a lot of times when people think of fasting, they think of being hungry. They expect to be low energy. Is that typical and common? And what else should people expect from their first extended fast?
Yeah, Daniel, I think on day one, certainly the battle is a battle around hunger. And really, this comes about because the hormone in your system called ghrelin, and I call it the little gremlin, is your I am hungry hormone. And that hormone has been trained to be released in your body to coincide with your meal time. So if you were a 3 meal a day person, one would find that you would look around and feel that you would need to eat around those 3 meal times that you've trained your body and trained ghrelin to be released into your system. Now, so that doesn't change in any extended fast. So whether it's your first, whether it's your 10th, whether or not you have pre-fast regime correct, or you've done your pre-fast regime correctly, that action of ghrelin raging in your system and really testing your metal is day one. And I normally, because I'm a maybe a break fast. I tend to, I haven't fasted heavily in the last couple of months, and I'm taking a tolerance break, which is important. And we'll talk tolerance breaks in the future as well, I'm sure. But it's vitally important for one to understand that day one is all in the hormone ghrelin, and it's a mind, it's a mental battle. You might even feel slightly hangry, as they would call it. So hangry is probably the best adjective to describe day one. And once you've passed that, ghrelin has been in your system for about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, and you've kept yourself busy. I tend to separate myself from my family. Unfortunately, I'm not strong enough just yet to be able to sit and have a meal with them. That's really what I think one of my big tasks are on a personal level for 2021, is to be able to have a meal with my family and not feel deprived in any way. But that's day one. Then day two is where things really start to change in your body, where the headache might present itself, as well as a lack of energy. And it's very common for people at around 48 to 55 hours to actually have a small nap on their 3 day fasting journey. And once you've passed 48 hours, 55 hours, so that window between 48 and 55, then your body starts to really kick into the extended and prolonged fasting benefits. And then you start feeling almost a natural high. And ghrelin is then depleted in your system and totally diminished. And then you can start actually expecting to feel a euphoria, a certain euphoria that comes from fasting. And that can last from day 2 to day 5 even. That's an amazing and almost an addictive euphoria that certainly I found quite fetching, and it drew me into fasting, and one of the reasons I continue to fast. And that's more or less what one can expect. So yes, your energy will drop, not in day one. In day two, end of day two, you'll start feeling a little lethargic, and really that's where the switch, if you like to call it that, the switch in your system happens, and you're then burning purely on ketones, and there is no glucose left in your system. From a physiological perspective, the glucose have now been missing, and your blood sugars have normalized already after 12 hours. So you can expect, so that's already 30 hours later that your body then goes through the energy switch.
I don't think a lot of times we get through that hunger stage a lot of times. It's we kind of, whether we're trying to fast or not, we get hungry and we eat. And yeah, it's crazy how we can kind of program ourselves. And just personal experience, it's like, when you expect to eat at, let's just say, noon, that's when you eat lunch. It's for me, it's like, man, I just get hungry and I know I just ate a few hours ago, and
Right.
it's I shouldn't be hungry. And it is kind of cool because, like, if I wait it out, if I can't eat, or something happens, the hunger does pass, and it's like, oh, I
It
don't,
does.
I'm fine. It's like, oh,
Mm.
why was I
Yeah.
feeling so weird? And
Yeah.
it's almost like time slows down around that hunger, around that eating window in a way. It's like, oh, it's 11:45, but I eat it, typically at 12:15, 12:30, and it's like
Right.
it takes another 6 hours to get to 11 or to 12 o'clock.
Totally.
And it's
Yeah.
crazy how our whole kind of system and mind and body can revolve around that next meal.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the most affected experiences with intermittent fasting is the management of ghrelin, so the I'm hungry hormone, versus the I'm full and satiated hormone, which is leptin. And those are the two that are probably more affected during intermittent fasting than people realize. And so skipping that, I mean, we've been well marketed to through the generations that breakfast is a morning meal. And so I try not to use the language inside the practice to say breakfast being a morning meal. So just forgive me if I don't quite refer to them like that. But your first meal of the day, if you had to skip that, call it early morning meal, and really just hold out until lunchtime, it's within about 3 days your body starts to regulate itself and starts to actually make the changes in terms of ghrelin being released, and you feeling like you can't make it to 12 noon when you're looking for that meal at quarter two.
When it comes to intermittent fasting, we're kind of talking about maybe some like effects on your body and on your brain, but are there any effects from an intermittent fasting perspective that you may see or feel, just not necessarily in a single kind of day, but in a week or in a month? Is there any side
Yeah.
effects on any systems or hair, skin, things like that you would see?
Yeah, yeah, you would. So, one of the big areas that I work on, particularly in my client pool, which happens to be ladies over the age of 40, some premenopausal. There are a number of postmenopausal ladies that I'm also looking after. But let's just look at that category, for instance, and there are a couple of things that are plaguing that life stage, and one of them is a lack of sleep. So they are normally very successful business, either owners or high-powered executives that I get to interact with. And so sleep is something that is critical to them because they need a full charge to be able to execute on their days. Many of them are mothers with a number of children, so they're running kids, households, businesses, and the energy demand on their system is incredible. So getting enough sleep and rest and feeling recharged is probably the second to weight loss that I find in that category. And then third would be what I call brain fog. So the memory starts to become a challenge, and certainly when I've just mentioned all three of the other stresses that they've got, like family, business, and time, then having an optimally functioning brain is critical in their lives. So those are the two areas: sleep and brain fog. Those are probably the two that are affected more quickly with intermittent fasting than one normally understand through the process. But then obviously weight loss. So centimeters in clothes. So those are probably the three physical changes that one notices with intermittent fasting within 14 days. Another area that I think people do notice when they are in the intermittent fasting phase of their journeys is the requirement to urination and nighttime sweats from that age group. So ladies in a life stage plus 40, there are hormonal changes that are happening inside their bodies. Hot flashes are something that are quite common to ladies about to go through change of life. And all of that, as well as nighttime urination, particularly those that are suffering with insulin resistance. It's one of those side effects that no one really talks about, but you're up and down all night. And that obviously interrupts your sleep, interrupts your rest, and interrupts your recuperation. And so those areas are marked in terms of seeing differences within 14 to 21 days, even on the intermittent fasting regime.
Obviously we know, like, hey, you need to get a good night's sleep, but just the crazy culture kind of effects that we've created because we're all kind of lacking this such crucial aspect of health, which is sleep. Yeah, it's one of those things that I think if we could figure out and really emphasize getting it right as a world, then I think there would be just so many different benefits that we have no idea would come from it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And often it's there are a couple of contributing factors if we talk sleep and fasting. So when you're in the intermittent fasting regime, I mentioned earlier that electrolytes are being depleted in your system just by the mere virtue of the fact that you're not taking on any calories, you're not taking on any food, and so your body is depleted of certain electrolytes. And one of those electrolytes is potassium. And potassium and zinc are probably the two minerals that are in your system that if you were battling with sleep and didn't know where to start and couldn't really put your finger on understanding why you're not getting the rest you think you need, I often check those two markers either through my quantum resonance scanning machine. So we use a scanning machine, or through blood work, and to understand that potassium and zinc, those are the two contributors to a good night's rest. And as an intermittent faster, those are the two things, or those are certainly one of or two of the many electrolytes that you do deplete not eating. So often those have knock-on effects if those levels are low to your sleep and your ability to. So zinc puts you to sleep, and potassium will keep you asleep.
When it comes to intermittent fasting, is there any benefit to whether you eat during the morning time or and fast at night, or is it vice versa? Is there any benefit to either one of those?
Daniel, I haven't seen any scientific papers that talk about benefits being either that you fast at night or fast during the day. I haven't seen those pieces of research surface just yet. And in all honesty, I haven't really looked to those. What I tend to do though is I tend to, I mentioned earlier to you that I was on a tolerance break, so I'm not fasting at the moment at all. And my coach, because even I need a coach, my coach is now starting to do what I call surprise fasting, or and he literally tells me the day before I'm going into a fast what my number of hours, when I start, and when I'll end. So and I think really to answer your question is, if you've been doing intermittent fasting for 6 months, please give yourself a tolerance break. That's the first thing. Particularly if you're over 40, and particularly if you're postmenopausal, you need a totally different fasting regime, because your body will start being depleted of testosterone in certain extended fasting periods. And when I say extended fasting periods, I'm not talking about an extended fast. I'm talking about intermittent fasting for 6 months on the trot is probably not recommended, actually. Then breaking it up and then coming back to your actual question, which is, are there benefits to start my fast at night or to start my fast first thing in the morning? I use the different kickoff times to help my body switch it up, as they would say. Because autophagy, as I mentioned much earlier in the session, was about shocking your body and about putting your body under a bit of stress and creating those different start times and end times, and getting yourself out of a rut, as they would call it, because your body does adjust, and your body is so amazing, it adjusts fairly quickly. So, anybody fasting, intermittent fasting for more than 6 months should change up not only the time, their duration of fast. So I would change up by an hour. I would also change the start. So instead of being in an evening, which is, we normally start clients off in the evening. So we say to them, your last meal anywhere between 5 and 6, maybe even 7 in the evening. And certainly by 8 o'clock, we're in a fasted state, all the way through to the next day at 12 o'clock, which is a 16-hour fast. And that's how we start people in our program. But within 3 months, I'm kicking them off at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then performing 16 hours of fast.
Gotcha. So what you're saying is kind of once you get a little experience with a certain schedule, you want to switch it up. And when you say like take a kind of a break from that, does that mean you're still intermittent fasting? You're just doing it on a different schedule?
No, so no fasting whatsoever, Daniel. So
Okay.
I've been on 3 weeks sabbatical, if you'd like to call it that, from fasting, and I've even consumed carbohydrates and sugars. So earlier we were talking about what diet to follow. I happen to follow a ketogenic diet, and that's only because I'm looking for some benefits from a sugar restriction perspective, and because I'm still on my own journey. I've still got about 7 or 8 kilograms to go, so about what is it? 14 pounds to go. So I'm taking a tolerance break in totality. So absolutely no fasting, absolutely no restriction on any foods. But what is actually kind of manifested out of that for me is I still don't have an early morning meal, and I'm still fairly restrictive on myself. Just when I enter into, say I go for coffee with somebody at a restaurant, I still would opt for no sugar in my coffee and cream, as opposed to, and in the States, like cream is milk, right? So
Yes.
I'm talking about heavy pouring cream. So I just opt for those as a natural position. Yeah, and so I'm on a tolerance break where there is absolutely no restriction. So if I were to have a breakfast engagement or a morning engagement, and everyone else was having a meal while I was in my tolerance break, I'd certainly opt for things like eggs, bacon, no carbohydrate on from a breads or toast perspective. And that's just me. I guess it's my lifestyle now. But when I'm on a tolerance break, there are no restrictions. So I might even crack open a beer. I certainly have over the last 3 weeks. And on Sunday, I get back down to what I call surprise fasting with my coach, where he'll let me know on Sunday evening how many hours I'm doing on Monday, when I start and when I break my fast, because I need to switch it up and I need my body to be surprised, as they would say, so that I can get the best benefits from intermittent fasting.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's definitely an idea that I haven't heard of yet. So it's cool to get that. I think from a, looking at it from a exercise perspective, we don't just always train hard, and we don't just always do the
Exactly.
same exercises. So it makes sense to kind of get the same switch within your nutrition. So yeah, that's something I'll
Exactly.
have to keep in mind as I kind of keep going along with my own intermittent fasting and eventually, longer fast. Is there a particular point within someone's, do you recommend starting with intermittent fasting, and then, how much kind of lead up to that would you say before someone does do an extended fast?
Yeah, I think, Daniel, I think the idea around getting fasting fit is something we are quite firmly behind. I mean, any fasting is good for the system. We try to take people through a structured program where over week one we have alternate day fasting. In week two, we kind of stretch everyone to 6 of 7 days fasted, 16 hours. We repeat that cycle in week three. And by week four, we're 6 days a week, 18/6 is our fasting schedule. And by that time, they're fasting fit. They've got all the benefits of intermittent fasting. And then there's a decision we make around what is it that we're wanting to achieve from a prolonged fast, and then take many of our clients into a prolonged fast. So it's kind of, we've got kind of a 5 to 6 week program that we take people through. Obviously, from a commercial perspective, we've had to create some consistency around what does a package look like. For anyone trying intermittent fasting on their own, I certainly would get fasting fit before I did a 3-day fast.
When it comes to the intermittent fasting, and I know we're kind of jumping around, but just have different, different thoughts pop in my head, different questions. Hopefully these are questions other people are having. So I don't want to just because we may not be on the same topic anymore, I don't want to kind of neglect those
Sure.
questions. Going to the intermittent fasting, would you
Yes.
recommend, or is there any benefit to, say, eating one time a day versus 2 to 3 times a day?
Okay. Yeah, and I think that really is determined by what your goals are. And remember that when you have something to eat and at any calories, and it doesn't really matter whether or not there's a high glucose content or a high sugar content in that meal, each time that you activate insulin in your system, the body then shuts down from the benefits of intermittent fasting. And so if you were wanting to lose weight, I would recommend, or let's maybe back it up a little bit. If I was trying to reverse something like type 2 diabetes or diabetes in totality, it would be very, very critical for me to reduce the number of times I ask the body to release insulin. And that would then typically be one meal a day. And in that meal, there shouldn't be any calorie restrictions. You should get to eat exactly as much as you'd like. In fact, eat until you're full is really the guidance we give people. But then obviously making sure that there are no carbohydrates or sugars, particularly for a diabetic. And whereas sugars, I would actually warrant that 2 meals in their intermittent fasting program would be beneficial rather than 1 meal. And the reason I say that is because I want the body's glucose levels to rise and insulin to rise with that. And then I'd like for it to return back to a normal value, and the body then to go back into a what we call glucose burn versus a fat burn, and have the ability to switch between the two. We call it fat adaptation inside the ketogenic world. One becomes fat adapted, and that means that the body is now using fat as a fuel source as opposed to sugar and glucose as a fuel source. So to answer your question, if I was losing weight, I'd go for 2 meals a day. If I was managing sugar and getting off my diabetic medications, 1 meal a day. And again, this needs to be worked up to. This is not something you just step in and say, right, today I'm only going to have 1 meal a day. I'm going to, and I'm going to kick off my intermittent fasting schedule with 18 hours as opposed to 14, 12, or even 16 hours. And I think that's important for people to understand is what are the goals that you're wanting to achieve? Are you managing weight or are you managing sugar?
On these longer fasts, on these 2, 3, 5, 7 day fasts, and I guess even maybe to an extent on intermittent fasting, if you're doing, more fasting, longer fasting windows, how would you recommend someone still get, those essential vitamins and minerals that that our body needs?
So that would be through your water intake and adding a good electrolyte source to the water, because the electrolytes won't affect insulin, won't break fast, and still allow the body to get replenished with the right electrolytes. In terms of what vitamins and minerals, so if you're losing weight, vitamin D is probably very, very, very instrumental in that. I would normally look to the sun for that. So getting out and actually exposing your body to a bit of sunlight, because that's probably the most efficient source of vitamin D. So vitamin D is certainly diminished when you're even in an intermittent fasted state. And to get those vitamins back into your system, do them inside your feed window. So typically we start people out on a 14-hour fast, so 14 hours of fasting, 10 hours of feeding. And we would then say that's the window to then take your vitamins, take your minerals. And then in the extended fasts and the prolonged fasting, it's in the water source itself. And I showed you my product last time, so I'm not going to bore your viewers with it. We've developed a really robust water that we hope will be globally taken on and I'm sure there'll be many people that replicate our water solution. But in essence, it's to make sure that your electrolytes are kept at a certain level through that prolonged fast, because you want the body then to naturally exit the cells and as autophagy is from the Greek eat thine self. So you still want the body to eat thine self during that extended fast. You just want it to be able to do it in a safe, responsible manner by having the right electrolytes in your body.
So much information when it comes to this stuff, intermittent fasting, extended fasting, and just nutrition in general, and how the body works with food and without it. There's so much to know, and I'm glad we got to hop back on the podcast. And
thank you. Thanks for inviting me back.
Yeah, it was great to get to talk to you and learn of from somebody, because it's tough when you have questions and you want to Google it, because then you gotta sift through, where's the information coming from? Is this information coming from someone who has different goals? Like all that different stuff. It's good to get to have these conversations and get to share them too. That's part of the magic.
Thank you. And I really relish the opportunity to bring fasting to a global audience. And thank you for allowing me to touch your American audience. And I really enjoy sitting and sharing with you. The weight room is the place to be watching in the future and to get behind. Daniel, thanks for all the good work you're doing.
Absolutely. And thank you as well. You're helping a lot of people out there in your own thing you're doing, and in my thing. And, when we combine them, I think it's great too. So once again, I want to say thanks for coming on, and I'll have to stay in touch with future episodes.
Thank you. And autophagy for life. Thanks, Daniel.